Welcome back to Grumpy Vet Garage. Today we're back on my 2007 Chevy Silverado 2500 HD, trying to correct some issues. In a previous video I talked about a road trip I took. It was about 5 hours each direction, so 10 hours total. And on that road trip, a couple things that I already knew was a problem were highlighted as more serious than I was taking them. First thing being visibility. That's why in a previous video I went ahead and changed out the headlight assemblies to an LED setup, an Alpha Rex Nova Series LED setup. So if you want to see that, click the link in the description and go check out that video. But the other issue I was having is being from Florida and living in South Carolina, mostly the roads are flat. The truck handles pretty good. When I first got it, it didn't handle very well. I actually changed pretty much every suspension and steering part on this truck to Kryptonite brand parts, except for the steering box. So I have Kryptonite center link, tie rods, bushings, ball joints, upper control arms, but I still have the factory steering gear. Truck has about 340,000 miles, and I believe it actually may be the original steering gear. So I ended up getting a redhead steering gear for this truck. I got their HD model, which is supposed to be an upgrade above a standard rebuilt steering gear. So they're still going to want this steering gear back so they can rebuild it to make either a standard rebuild or their HD. The HD build, they check the squareness of the shafts inside of the steering gear. They also, in places that didn't have bearings, they installed needle bearings to make the smoothness of the gear improved over what OEM is. But considering how much my truck was moving around on construction, narrowed mountain roads in Tennessee, anything is going to be an improvement over what I had. But to install the new one, I wanted to go ahead and pull out the old one first, and then we can compare the old unit, which is 340,000 mile crusty, versus the brand new redhead steering gear unit. So to start this install, you need to go ahead and lift up the front of your truck. You really do need to use jack stands. So I've used 2 jack stands on the frame back here, and then I have a jack up front under the front section of the cross member. And to gain access to the driver's side wheel well, you'll need to remove your wheel, and you would need to remove your fender liner, because on a diesel, we're going to remove the cold side or the hot side charge pipe, so that we can try to get access to the top fittings on the steering gearbox. If you have a 2500 HD and it's a 6.0 gas rather than a 6.6 Duramax, then you may not need to remove anything on that side, but you need to be able to gain access to the top of the steering gear right here. So now I've removed the intercooler pipe, and there's actually the hot side intercooler inlet to gain access to the top of the steering box. These 2 lines right here are the 2 lines that we're going to need to disconnect for the fluid, and then these 3 bolts here are the bolts that actually mount the steering gear to the frame. But before breaking this, breaking these loose to drain it, I want to disconnect the pitman arm on the bottom. So let me go ahead and show you that. Now we're under the vehicle, and of course your setup may be different than mine. This is the Kryptonite center link I was talking about previously. This is a stabilization kit that actually sandwiches the center link, but above that is a Kryptonite pitman arm. To get the box out, we need to disconnect this nut, and we'll get all this off, and then pop the pitman arm loose from the center link. And then so it might be difficult to see, but coming in over the sway bar down to where the pitman arm is, I don't like using pickle forks like this, but considering where it is on my particular truck with the large center link from Kryptonite, this was the best way to go. What you really don't want to do is use any kind of air hammer on the actual stud itself. If you can get it to come off with a couple good strikes with a hammer, great, but an air hammer just does too much damage, and you can really mess up your pitman arm, especially if it's one you're keeping and not just changing. But yeah, a pickle fork and a good mini sledge and pop it free. Okay, so for the lines, both fittings on the box are 18 millimeter and they're on top. The one that is closest to me, that one is actually the return coming from the pump. So before I crack this, what I did is I went up top using a fluid transfer pump, got as much fluid as possible out of this pump and reservoir that I could. You're not going to be able to get all of it. There's really no way around it. This is going to make a little bit of a mess, so be prepared. A drain pan, rag, something to try to catch that fluid. I might have an oil pan for me. But what I'm going to do first is disconnect this line, or at least loosen this line, and then disconnect this from the pump. That's going to get quite a bit of fluid out, but then this line here can actually completely come out. There's a clip over here that's already been undone by me that holds it to the fan shroud. But when this is disconnected and then the closest fitting is disconnected, this whole line will come out. Then I can move to the other one. But again, be prepared. There's no clean way to do this. Okay, so here is the steering gear return line removed. Now you can just set this aside. Before removing the pressure line, I found out that about halfway up on the inside of the rail is a clamp holding that line. To get that out of the way, I think I'm going to go ahead and just disconnect the steering shaft first. But before you do that, it's best to run the seatbelt through the steering wheel just to make sure it doesn't spin. It shouldn't, but just to make sure that it doesn't. You don't want to damage the clock spring that's inside of your column. So go ahead and do this before disconnecting that. Here's the steering shaft removed, and this would be the orientation that it would be in the vehicle. And you need to make sure to maintain that same orientation. So wheels being straight, this bolt, which is an 11 millimeter bolt, will be straight up and down. And this bolt being a 15 millimeter will be facing you. This clip right here is a retainer to help you put that back in. So when you pull this 15 millimeter bolt out, be looking for this retainer because it'll fall off. Okay, so the pressure line has been disconnected, the one that goes to the Hydro Boost. I disconnected it, and then I put it up on top of the power steering pump just to kind of get it out of the way. Put a rag up there to try to stop any kind of leakage from getting in the area. Steering shaft's already removed, so now we need to remove the mount bolts for the steering gear. The steering gear is not a light unit, so loosen all three, but only remove two, and then you need to be ready to support the weight of that steering gear as we try to remove it. Remember, it is heavy. So there is the crusty old steering gear with the pitman arm still attached. But if you look up into the frame rail area, this is where it mounts. Instead of going up over, which I thought it would, there's a lot of room here. And once you push it up, you can get it to roll over and come straight out the front in front of the sway bar. So that is definitely the way you want to go. But now let's... Okay, so here's the two gears side by side. I still got to take my Kryptonite pitman arm off of the old one. A tool like this is what you would end up using. It slips over and then you can press that off. So I'm going to do that real quick, and then that way with the arm off, I'll be able to kind of give you more of a side by side between the two gears. So here are the two gears side by side. Here's the old one and here's the new one. Got the pitman arm off. But you can see there's small differences in the casting. This one seems to be larger than this one. So I don't know if when I purchased the HD, they give me a different casting and they just use this old casting as their standard. But it all matches up. The size of the mounts, the shaft size, everything matches. So now I'm going to go ahead and set up the pitman arm on the new one and then get ready to put it back in. Okay, so to install the pitman arm onto the steering gear, you're going to need, I should have mentioned it earlier, a 1 5/16 combo wrench, or you could use a socket, but the combo wrench is better for if you needed to do something like put on that stabilization kit while it's on the truck. You would want to have a wrench. Additionally, you're going to want to use some sort of grease to lube up the splines. You don't want to put them on dry. I'm using some Redline CB2, but you could use just general purpose. You don't have to use this. So just put a little bit of grease on the splines. Again, it doesn't have to be a lot. You just don't want it to go on dry. So you go ahead and line up the master splines and make sure it's going in the correct orientation. Already checked the rotation of the gearbox. So this lines up in the correct location for the steering shaft, and then this is going in the correct location to go to the center link. And then you put on the original hardware lock washer and nut, and then I'll go ahead and run this down. Doing it behind the camera is actually a little difficult, so I'm gonna go ahead and do this real quick and I'll come back. So pitman arm tightened back on, and I went ahead and came through the bottom and placed it into the center link. So still need to do the mounts, need to do the steering column back in, need to put the lines back on, reconnect to the power steering pump. But the key thing I want to remind anybody about is your steering column hardware and these mount hardware. You're going to want to use Loctite. You don't want any of this stuff backing out. Also, the same thing with your attachment to the center link. You're going to want to use Loctite. Blue Loctite would be sufficient, but this is not something that you want to vibrate back out, because losing control of your steering is not what you want. So take your time and put it all back together, and I'll come back when it's time to fill the power steering, and then we'll talk about bleeding. Came back a little earlier, I wanted to highlight something that I forgot to mention. So I already torqued on the box, and I was working on the lines, and I was like, oh, O-rings. You have to change the O-rings. Do not use the old ones that were with the old pump. The redhead steering gear comes with new O-rings, so make sure to replace them, but also make sure to lubricate them. A little bit of oil, a little bit of power steering, just something to lubricate it, so as you're tightening it down, it doesn't tear that O-ring. But using the old O-rings is not an option. You need to replace them. Okay, I have everything back together. I have the tire on, but still the vehicle lifted off the ground, because we have to have it off the ground for the bleed process. Hot side intercooler pipe in, and then you need to go ahead and top off your power steering reservoir, and then do start the bleed process. So how this process will work is, without turning on the vehicle, you're going to need to run the steering wheel lock to lock. So all the way to the left, all the way to the right, back and forth. They say 15 times, but like 10 to 15 times is good. And you'll see immediately that fluid will make its way down into the steering gear. Then you need to top it off again, do it again, do it at least 2-3 times until you don't see a difference in the fluid level. Then check your fluid level, get it ready, and then you can go ahead and crank the truck on. When you crank the truck on, you need to make sure that, let me unlock the truck real quick. When you turn the truck on, you need to make sure to not go all the way to lock, because that will really put stress on the power steering pump. And that's really what the bleed process is for. It's not for the steering gear. It's more for the power steering pump. You're trying to get all the air out of the system and make sure that the pump is full and lubricated. If you don't allow for that and you run the pump dry, or you go to full lock, you can potentially damage your power steering pump. And that's what the whole point of this is bleed the system without damaging the power steering pump. But you go ahead and do that, and then you can finally torque on your wheels and put it on the ground. So the redhead steering gear is installed on my 2007 Chevy Silverado 2500 HD, and I've already drove it a couple times to get a little bit of a feel of how it is and how it's improved. And it's improved drastically from what the worn steering gear is to this redhead. It's a much tighter system, smoother, a little bit more resistance in the steering wheel, but overall it's just so much tighter and a better handling truck than it was previously. So I hope this video was able to help you out. If you're thinking about getting a steering gear or doing some work on your truck and you need to remove the steering gear, I hope this was able to help you. If you got any comments about what I did or how I could do something differently, by all means leave those in the comments below. Also, if you like this kind of content, working on my Silverado or any of the other things we do in Grumpy Vet Garage, please consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps us out. Also, liking this video, sharing it with friends, that would also help the channel out. We also created a merch store. This is a Grumpy Vet Garage shirt right here. The link to that store is in the description. We also have hoodies, zip-ups, and pullovers in the store. I know winter's coming. It's a really beautiful day today in South Carolina, but winter's coming. So yeah, if you wanted to get some merch, by all means, go to the link and get yourself something. But thanks for coming and seeing me in my garage. And until next time, have a good one.